our monthly Gardening with DaleSmall. We're so excited to have his expert knowledge and gardening information to share with everybody. And it is the last one of the season. So I'm really glad you guys are here to join us. Thank you, Dale, for joining us. What's going on in gardening today?
Well, we're into the moist season with the changing of colors and so forth, kind of waiting for the first frost. And it might come this month, it might not. I've seen all kinds of weather in October. Several years we had 70-degree weather one week, and the next week it dropped into the teens. So I hope we don't get that again, but it's kind of up for grabs what the weather's going to do to us.
It is kind of interesting weather patterns we're seeing, you know, from the nice heat to the cool to the fall to those winds we had with the fires.
Well, it's kind of the season to start putting things away for the winter, kind of a fall cleanup and getting things into the compost pile and so forth. Kind of a season when a lot of people think about compost because they've got stuff to get rid of, and composting is a pretty good way to do that. And most all of your garden waste can be composted. You kind of want to chop things up a little bit if you can, but it's not necessary. They'll eventually break down, but they will take up a lot less space that way, and then you get good humusy material to add to your soil after you finish the compost. One thing to remember, things that the plant was done with and have completely dried up, like fallen leaves and straw, those have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio and will require additional nitrogen to help them completely break down. Things that are still green, corn stalks, for instance, and lawn clippings and so forth, those actually have a higher nitrogen ratio and can help the other things to break down.
So I've heard of, for example, straw or hay, when it's been piled up and it's gotten damp, it can be combustible.
Yeah, spontaneous combustion, and that is an issue with compost. The whole cycle is quite interesting. You start off with a few microorganisms in the raw material. The microorganisms start breaking it down, and they give off heat. And the natural insulating properties of the organic matter allows the center of the pile to warm up. And you'll go through a whole range of different species that work at different temperatures in the composting process up to maximum temperatures, and then they start dropping back down and back through those same species again. A compost pile should be a 3-foot cube as a minimum, because it needs that much to heat up adequately, but it shouldn't be much more than 4 or 5 feet, because when you get beyond that, it has a real chance of catching on fire. Frequently around here, we'll see a stack of hay bales that got left out for the winter, and those will be on fire by spring, because the composting action, the insulating properties, even though the bacteria can't survive the combustion temperature, the material even further into the pile from where the bacteria are working, those will cause the heat to get up high enough that it does actually catch on fire.
And has that happened? I mean, I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen that actually happen. Does it happen pretty frequently?
Well, I mean, most farmers know that that'll happen, so they try to get rid of the stuff. But I remember 2 times I've seen it in the last maybe 5 years. So it does happen. And also, if hay gets put away too wet into a barn, that will also catch on fire. This is why they oftentimes will salt hay. They'll put down a layer of bales, and then they'll salt it. Mm-hmm. And then put down another layer, and then a layer of salt. And that way, the bacteria, as they start to compost in the pile, when they get to that salt, they get killed, and so it's like a fire break in the hay bales.
Well, what is the best thing for compost? I mean, what is, it's obviously dry dead leaves. You mentioned straw, hay, grass clippings. What is one of the most beneficial things to compost?
Well, probably adding kitchen waste and things like that to it is helpful as well. It's generally just kind of balancing the material that you're putting in. It's kind of like cooking or making a fire or something like that. You want to have reasonable sized pieces. Maybe running the lawnmower over it first might help. And if you have lots of dry things that the plants were completely finished with, like fallen leaves that have a poor nitrogen level, you may want to add some additional nitrogen to the pile. Mm-hmm. So you could add some manure to it, or blood meal or sulfate of ammonia, one of those nitrogen fertilizers to help it along too. It just kind of depends on what the purpose of your compost pile is. Mine is mainly for getting rid of stuff, not so much excited about getting the compost as I've got to have it go somewhere. And rather than haul it to the landfill, I can compost it.
Okay.
Out where I live, I get a fair number of branches and limbs that I have to deal with too. And they're good enough size to burn, but I really don't have any need to be burning them. So I'm kind of doing a sort of a hugelkultur composting, which is it's a gardening technique that they're starting now, where essentially you create raised beds with logs underneath them. But my purpose is just to get rid of the wood without having to burn it. I lay it out evenly someplace where I want the soil to be built up, so the branches are all parallel with each other, and add organic matter over the top of them, and then they'll gradually break down and go into the soil, and it's a way of getting rid of them without having to haul them off or to burn them. Generally, when we produce compost, we wind up with a fairly dense material. For mulching, actually probably the leaves chopped up without being composted would make a better insulating mulch than the compost itself. Now, another thing, a few of us have walnut trees around, and walnuts have a self-protecting mechanism where they keep weed competition down by poisoning adjacent plants. And a lot of roses and tomatoes and things like that really don't like that chemical. And so you want to avoid walnut leaves in your compost if you're going to use it everywhere. On the other hand, if you've got a lot of walnut leaves and you want to deal with them, you can make compost with them and use them around plants that are resistant to the juglone chemical, and you can have a weed preventing compost from it.
Does anybody have questions for Dale besides me?
I have a question.
Yes.
The question is about palm trees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot of landscapers on these new homes put palm trees in. Is that really, do they really do well up here?
A few species, but the main one that's used around here is the Washington fan palm, Trachycarpus fortunei. And it's a Chinese variety of palm tree. If you've driven into Salem on Silverton Road, you've seen that house that has the line of palm trees lining the driveway. They lost one or two in the first early years, but most of them have been doing fine. And gosh, I think they've been there 10 years now. So, but yes, that particular species of palm tree is quite hardy here. There's big ones in Portland, and they're starting to be planted around. There's a palmetto type one that has multiple trunks, and it's more of a low shrubby type plant, Camerops humulus, that is also quite hardy. But usually if you want a palm tree, you want it to look like a palm tree, and so that the Trachycarpus fortunei fan palm is the main one that we use around here. There's a number of exotic looking foliage plants and tropical plants. An interesting one that I came across a while back is it's a vine called Chilean glory vine, and the hummingbirds love it. It's a bright orangey red with a yellow lip to the tube-like flowers and clusters, and it's really a delicate looking thing. And I thought, oh my gosh, this thing will never make it through the winter. I wasn't even trying to save it over, and it didn't even lose its leaves. It kept its foliage through the winter. This year my plant started blooming in March, and it's been pretty much off and on blooming all summer since then. And but it really looks quite tropical and delicate, but it's a lot tougher than we think it is. So yeah, you come across some fun plants. Another one I came across that I kind of enjoy it, but it's almost, I would consider it invasive, except that it's native. So I don't know what you call an invasive native plant, but it's one of the monkey flowers. It's Mimulus cardinalis. It really prefers moist soil, but oh my gosh, it comes out everywhere. And it also has a nice orangey red flower that the hummingbirds love. And it's quite hardy if you can give it plenty of moisture.
Do we get enough natural moisture for the monkey flower plant? Or?
Not if you had it, out in some place that was uncontrolled, because we actually have what we call a Mediterranean climate. We're very wet from now through maybe next June, but June through September, we're significantly drier than most of the United States. So we get very, very dry. That's one thing I noticed when I went back east one time is, my gosh, the roadside weeds didn't dry up. I know there was a big thunderstorm came through every few days. So it rained all summer, whereas here, once we hit 4th of July, you might not see rain again until October.
I had a question on Nandina.
Yeah.
At our other house, we had burgundy Nandina, and it was in a spot that was kind of bordered by the sidewalk and the driveway, so it behaved itself. But when we moved here, I put in probably 10 or 12 burgundy Nandina as foundation plants, and we're finding that they just live up to their name of heavenly bamboo, and they send out shoots all over the place. They get into all the other landscapes, so we're constantly cutting back these advances of the plant.
They're not a bamboo at all. They're not a grass. They're actually related to Oregon grape and barberries. Is their family that they're related to, but they have certainly that tropical bamboo look about the foliage. Yeah, well, that's the thing about Nandina. There's a lot of different cultivars of them, and so you need to kind of research which cultivar you've chosen and figure out what the size is, because some of them will barely get a foot 18 inches tall, and others will get up maybe 6 feet tall, and they tend to stay relatively upright and relatively close to the look. I mean, they're not going to take off and like a bamboo and be 50 feet away in a few years, but they can definitely fill in a space. And of course, even Oregon grape has some of these tendencies. I have a friend that bought a new house, and in his living room, between the carpet and the floorboard, an Oregon grape sprout came up, and it had there was a big plant outside, and it had snuck up a stem up underneath the siding and came right into the living room.
Well, we fought the creek dogwood that they put in for a while. We had the landscaper put in Midnight Sun Creek dogwood, which was beautiful. But it too, I guess if the middle name of the plant is stoloniferous or something, that means it sends these roots out sideways all over the place. So we removed that. We're still fighting those shoots coming up all over the place.
Yes, the dogwood's a big family. I mean, there's a ground cover form, the Cornus canadensis or bunchberry, that's just a few inches tall. There's the typical tree forms that most of us are familiar with, an evergreen one as well as the deciduous. But there's a whole series of foliage or winter stem color dogwoods as well. The stoloniferas are usually grown because their stems are brightly colored in the wintertime. They can definitely spread and form a thicket. But again, they don't go very far. But yeah, if you're trying to make it look formal, it sometimes has different ideas.
I have noticed a lot of bamboo in our area. It seems, I don't believe bamboo is native, is it? But we've seemed to have I've seen a lot growing around, and I know it can be pretty invasive.
None of the bamboos are native here in the north, but quite a few of them are hardy. The majority of bamboos are what we call running bamboos, and they have underground stolons that spread and form thickets. In places where they have lots of bamboo and they're used to them, they control it just by watching in the spring when the sprouts come up, they just snap them off and throw them into the stir fry. They're edible, and so they just break them off and eat them. But if it's coming up in the midst of some other shrub that you didn't see 10 feet away, all of a sudden, next thing you know, here's the bamboo there. Now, there are clumping bamboos that do not spread at all. Most of them are not hardy here, but there's a couple of them that are probably the hardiest for the bamboos that could even be grown in eastern Oregon climates. They don't form the thick, heavy culms or canes, but they do have that bamboo graceful type foliage and will definitely stay as clumping forms. Now also there's some cultivars that in our climate have not shown any signs of clumping, but this is not a something that you can promise forever just because they haven't clumped in the haven't decided to spread in the last 50 years. If we start having just a few degrees warmer climate every year, they might suddenly decide, oh, this is our climate now, and they'll take off and start doing it. One of those that I particularly like is called Robert Young, like the name of the actor, and it's a nice looking bamboo and has attractive culms and foliage and so forth, and has not been a spreader so far, but no guaranteeing what it'll do 10 years from now when the weather changes.
So when you say clumping, that's interesting. We have some ornamental grass here at the senior center that I believe are in clumps. And when we were talking about downsizing some of them, and it might have been you, but it might have been the city, said that we could take one clump and divide it into 4s and then put one fourth back in.
That'll give you a fresher, more vigorous specimen, and it'll be more graceful for a few years and grow back into that space. And of course, you can give away the other 3 or plant them someplace else.
Right.
It's kind of like fads come and go and so forth. And oh gosh, it's probably been 10, 20 years now, but back before that, there was like 2 ornamental grasses you could buy. You could buy the little blue fescue clumpy things for making patterns, and they just maybe grow the size of a soccer ball. And then the other one was the old-fashioned pampas grass,
Yes.
which grows into a big evergreen clump that gets maybe 6 to 8 feet in diameter and sends up flower spikes 10 feet in the air. That one's much harder to find anymore because it's become invasive in California and other areas. I've never known it to set seedlings up here in the north, but because it's a problem in other parts of the country, the demand for it has dropped. So you don't find it quite as much as you used to. But there were a couple of landscape architects in Germany that made it a very popular modern style of landscaping. And I think they're wonderful as an accent here and there to give texture contrast for other foliage textures, but they can sometimes be overused.
Well, I know I have kind of an obscure question. We probably have talked about it in the past. We had received a donation of bark chips, and in it was some wonderful horsetail spores. Have we talked about the horsetails before? How do you get rid of them?
Well, horsetail is a very ancient plant. It's as much older than the dinosaurs are older than us. It's been around a long, long time. Interesting plant. It's basically got your chlorophyll, but it has almost like a quartz shell around the outside of the plant. And that's why the pioneers used it as scouring material for scouring pots and so forth, because it has all of that natural silica in it. And that's why nothing else eats it, because it's like eating glass. It makes it a little bit more difficult to control with chemicals. And in fact, there's not a whole lot that is very effective. I have observed that good old-fashioned crossbow does a decent job of burning it back, which is causing it to not be able to keep building up its root system, but it doesn't completely kill it in my observation. But I would think that if you hit it every year with crossbow for 3 or 4 years, you might eventually get rid of it.
Right. We've had a dickens of a time. They have quite the intricate rooting system, and you can't just pull them up. Somebody mentioned cutting them off and pouring hot water down into the roots.
Yeah, you wouldn't. The soil will dissipate that heat so quickly that you might scald that upper surface, but a couple inches further down, the water had lost all its heat by the time it got that far.
And I don't think there's any way you can check for those sort of things when I'm pretty sure the gentleman didn't know the spores were in the bark dust, bark chips. there's no way we could have known, but boy, it's been a real problem over the last few years.
The main technique on dealing with it is just don't allow it to develop foliage that could build up the root system. And you can starve it out after a few years, but that means you have to keep it up for several years. And if you quit for a summer or something like that, you start over again.
The benefits truly of fires for the forests and upkeeping of the natural landscape. I do understand that that is something that is, really does happen. It does take away all the pests and everything.
It does regenerate, and it comes back. I, for a number of years, did a church camp near, at Subtle Lake, which is across the Sandy Am Pass, and the B&B complex fire came through and burned that area out. Oh gosh, maybe it's 20 years ago now, 15 years ago anyway, and it burned through that whole area, and it was interesting how different effects, caused differences in the fire result, because right immediately around the lake, apparently the updraft of moist air from the lake protected the trees right around the lake. But when you got 50 to 100 feet away from the lake, then you could see where the fire was. And the whole area where I had my teepee camp, that area burned through, and we couldn't go back there for several years because they're concerned that the fire had burned roots off of the dead standing trees, and if the roots were gone, they would just fall down without warning. So we had to wait for a couple of years to see what was still sturdy. But the foliage came back through, and but we were able to camp back in that area again. The area where we had a lot of standing dead trees, they had fungus that was working on the decaying wood, and they looked like pink human noses sticking out of the trees all over. It was very bizarre.
Yeah.
The wildflowers and shrubs and so forth came back into that area relatively quickly.
Well, and that brings up in my mind, what some of the wildfires they've had down in South America.
Yeah, some of those are very, very old forests, and that's the fires are partly natural, but also partly man-made. And it's primarily Brazil that's having where they're going after the Amazon, and they're trying to convert it into agricultural land or other things, and they're not doing a very good job of it.
It made me think about our landscaping too. They were talking about making your house fireproof in your landscaping. And so of course we don't have a lawn, because we went with the don't have a lawn theory. So we have a lot of shrubs, and I have 13 trees in the backyard, and we have a lot of trees, and they're small, dogwoods and maples and stuff. But and of course bark dust can burn too. So you're looking at your house thinking, well, how fireproof have I made the yard?
But I think people maybe start to think about different type of architecture in the forest lands, because you see a lot of these pictures, and maybe half the trees are burned, but the other half are still just fine. But all of the human structures just rubble laying on the ground. And if those buildings hadn't been made out of wood, they might not have had the fire issue. Certainly you can have more fire-resistant surfaces. Steel roofs probably ought to be required. For instance, we live on a farm about 3 miles south of town with grass seed farming all around us. So we decided, okay, the building just needs to be all surfaced with fireproof material. So it's got a steel roof and aluminum or masonry siding on it. There's the outside of it's built with wood on the inside, but none of the outside is flammable. People may start doing more and more of that kind of thing, but I think just concrete tilt-up buildings and steel roofs and so forth might be the way to go out in out in the wilderness and not even allow them to, you can use maybe 10% wood in your construction, but no more than that.
Well, Dale, as we're going into the fall and into the winter, we've talked a little bit about composting. Is there anything else we should be getting ready to do or be doing to make our gardens better for next year?
Well, this is a good time for spreading some of your recurrent seeds of things that come back every year. And of course, sometimes part of the cleanup sometimes spreads that stuff around too. But in meadow lawns and flower beds and so forth, it's a good time of year to be doing some general cleanup, although it's maybe a little bit early to be going after rose bushes and things like that, because you don't want to prune them and stimulate them into tender growth that might be hit by frosts next month. So I generally like to hold back on pruning the rose bushes until we've had at least a moderate frost. And from this point on in the season, I generally leave the rose hips on rather than deadheading, because they're not going to get any more flowers beyond what's already budded up. And a few rose hips on the plant will help the plant go into dormancy a little bit better. Your fall pruning on a rose bush is to just kind of generally reduce wind resistance. On a hybrid tea, for instance, you just kind of arbitrarily about 3 feet, just cut off everything that sticks up higher than that, and then wait until the end of winter, late February typically is when we do it, and then do your full formal pruning on the hybrid teas at that point.
So what is your favorite thing to garden, Dale, in your yard?
Oh gosh, I've got a collection of Sarracenia pitcher plants that are a carnivorous insect-eating plants. Those are kind of fun. They have very spectacular blossoms in the spring. They're worth growing just for that, but they also have a very architectural and unique type of foliage. And they're hardy outdoor perennials around here. The trick about growing them is that they want to be extremely wet. They're swamp plants, and they also want to avoid minerals in their water and any fertilizers. So people that raise them typically will water them with rainwater or distilled water, or test their well water to make sure that the mineral level is low enough that they can water with that. And with that in consideration, they're extremely easy plants to grow. I grow mine in a big pot that I just set down in a rubber feed tub, and so it's got a deep saucer of water around it all summer. And then for wintertime, they stay out in the rain, but I take the saucers away so that they're not soggy and sitting in ice.
What do they like the most, ants or flies? Or
I find they're mainly yellow jackets and wasps.
that works.
And although I actually like yellow jackets and wasps, they're beneficial hunters in the garden.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
But, there's an abundance of them, and actually the two main species I have of both of them really aren't native here anyway. So they make good food for the pitcher plants. But I grow lots of different things. I like to grow a wide range of flowers to keep flowers growing as much as I can, and I like to watch and see what the bumblebees like, because the bumblebees they're my most useful pollinizer on the plants that I care about being pollinized. The tomatoes and cucumbers and that sort of thing. The bumblebee is the best pollinizer. So I watch what else they like to have, and so I have plenty of things out there for them.
Wow, that's some great information today, Dale. Thank you so much. So we will be looking forward to seeing you again in February, March. When do you?
I think probably March is what we should aim for. So
Sure. Give you a little time off. Well, thank you all for joining us today with Gardening with DaleSmall. That's the end of our season, and we'll see you back in March. Have a great day, everyone.